Hi everybody, and welcome to my presentation on Langston Hughes. I'm making this video for you because I looked all over the internet and I really couldn't find anything on Langston Hughes that I liked enough that I would share it on the internet, or on the D2L. So what I've decided to do is make my own little video to help you with the three poems that you've been assigned for this Friday class, which are Harlem, the Weary Blues, and The Negro Speaks of Rivers. So let's start by turning to page 630 in your textbook. So if you have this textbook here, this is going to be page 630, and we'll go ahead and take a look at Harlem. All right. So what's interesting about the poem Harlem is that the city Harlem, or the area of Manhattan known as Harlem, is not mentioned at all in the poem. So why call it Harlem? Many scholars will actually call this poem dream deferred, because the opening question of this poem is, what happens to a dream deferred? And that, for most people, is kind of a more fitting title. But why call it Harlem? Go back through my little PowerPoint slideshow and take a look at the Harlem Renaissance and what it was supposed to do. Harlem Renaissance was essentially an arts movement. And what the arts movement wanted to do was overcome racial divides by using the arts to bring races together. So essentially, if a singer or if a poet or if a playwright or a painter or whatever could show that black art, if you will, is actually as good as white art, then we would see that we're all humans, and basically skin color is only a pigment thing and not something that actually reflects intelligence or reflects artistic ability or something like that. So look through that and take a look at what the Harlem Renaissance was, and take a look at the key players. Many of them you may have heard of. They took part in the Harlem Renaissance. Langston Hughes was one of the biggest voices of the Harlem Renaissance. So you'll see that Harlem was published in 1951. This would be about 25 years after the Harlem Renaissance was pretty much ended. And what had happened by this point is there was still a lot of racial divide in America. There was still, us versus them mentality between the whites and the blacks. And so, in Langston Hughes' mind, the dream had not been fulfilled yet, or the promise had not been fulfilled yet. But he didn't say it was dead. Notice he used the word deferred in those opening lines. Deferred, of course, means to be put off or postponed. It doesn't mean to be stopped altogether. So, what is happening to this dream that just hasn't been fulfilled yet, or in other words, it has been deferred? Now, he's going to use a lot of vivid imagery. He's going to engage the senses here. He's going to engage sight. He's going to engage taste. He's going to engage smell. He's going to engage feel. I don't know about hearing so much, but he's going to engage these senses. So, he opens up with the first question: does it dry up like a raisin in the sun? So those are lines 2 and 3. Does it dry up like a raisin in the sun? Now, in this class, we will see Raisin in the Sun later this semester when we get to drama and we read Lorraine Hansberry's play, Raisin in the Sun. But what does happen to a raisin when it dries up in the sun? Is it edible anymore? Is it, or is it just like this hard piece of what used to be a grape? Does it serve any purpose anymore? Once it's dried up, most people will just throw it away. So perhaps this dream that was so juicy and so, wonderful in the beginning, actually at some point became hardened, and the people of Harlem became hardened, and the dream just didn't feel like it was going to be fulfilled, and it kept shriveling up and shriveling up and shriveling up like a raisin will do as it dries out. So that's the question for a raisin in the sun there. Then he's going to ask the question, or fester like a sore and then run. If you have a sore, especially an open sore, and you don't treat it and you don't put medicine on it, maybe a Band-Aid or something, it may become infected, and it will ooze pus, and it'll smell bad, and it could lead to bigger problems. So this sore that has happened because the dream has not been fulfilled is actually getting worse and getting infected and becoming much less, or actually much more unhealthy than what it was before. Just like a sore that's unattended to will become more unhealthy as it is less attended to. Does it stink like rotten meat? All right. Imagine your favorite steak. Mine's a ribeye, but you can have a New York steak, a sirloin, or whatever. A T-bone, whatever your favorite steak is. Now, when it's fresh, it will taste good and it will smell good when it's cooked. And man, to me, there's nothing like a good medium rare steak. You can cook your steaks however you like, but I like mine medium rare, nice and red on the inside, but not bleeding, and certainly not overdone. And then you season it just right, and it's delicious. But there's also nutritional value. Meat provides protein that helps to build muscles. So you've got the nutritional value as well as the deliciousness. But let's take that same piece of meat and let it sit for a few days uncooked, out in the elements. And it starts to rot. And it starts to smell bad. And you certainly wouldn't want to eat it. And if you did eat it, it wouldn't have the same nutritional value. It would actually make you sick rather than providing the protein that you need. So, just like a promising piece of steak can have lots of benefits if it's cooked and eaten at the right time, if it sits around too long, it actually becomes unhealthy and could be even toxic. Just like this dream that has not been fulfilled has now become a little unhealthy and toxic. A crusted sugar over like a syrupy sweet. So if you go to Krispy Kreme, first thing in the morning, you get those fresh donuts when they come off the line. Or if you're a Dunkin' Donuts fan, you can do that as well. I prefer Krispy Kreme, but there's nothing wrong with Dunkin' Donuts. So you get that fresh donut, and you've got that glaze on it, and it's nice and sticky, and then you eat it, and it's delicious. But what happens to that same donut later in the afternoon, after it's dried out a little bit? And that glaze is suddenly like a crust that when you pick it up, it'll kind of flake off. And it's not as good, right? So something that was really, really sweet just isn't quite as good anymore. Maybe it just sags like a heavy load. If you take a glass of water and you hold it up like this, it's not very heavy. But if I were to stay in this position, holding this same glass of water up, my arm would start getting tired and this glass would start feeling heavier until the point where I could hardly hold it up. If you can imagine having a backpack on your back, and some of you carry these heavy books in your backpacks. Imagine carrying it all day long, and the straps are getting a little loose, and the backpack's drooping, and it's weighing you down, right? It's a heavy burden that's just holding you back and slowing you down. Perhaps a deferred dream, an unfulfilled dream, is like that backpack. It's just holding you back. It's sagging down on you. It's holding you down. It's heavy. It's hard to walk. It's hard to breathe at times. Perhaps that's what happens to this. And then finally, the last question. Or does it explode? This is all about the pressure building up. And it builds up, and it builds up, and it builds up. And what causes an explosion? The pressure on the inside gets so much that the outside can't hold it in, and boom, you have a big mess. Perhaps this unfulfilled dream, this unfulfilled promise of the Harlem Renaissance has been building up so much pressure that an explosion is coming. This line could be a warning. And of course, if you look at the racial tensions of the 1950s and 60s, you'll see that, yes, things did build up. The pressure, the tensions, the racial strife did build up to a point where we had a lot of violence, we had a lot of bloodshed, and we had a lot of just basically bad things that happened as a result of it. So that does it explode? Has this unfulfilled promise and has this racial tension gotten to such a point where it can't be contained any longer, and boom, and then you have problems. And as it turns out, that's what happened. So that's the poem Harlem. Even though Harlem's not mentioned in it, if you think of the poem as dream deferred, and you think of it as referring to the unfulfilled promise of the Harlem Renaissance, then the poem makes much more sense. All right, the Negro speaks of rivers. You'll see in your footnote that, or maybe it's not in the footnote here, but Langston Hughes was inspired to write this poem as he was on a train crossing the Mississippi River. And one thing about rivers is that civilizations get built up along them. Rivers are necessary for water, sometimes for waste disposal. They're also necessary for trade. Boats going up and down, delivering goods from faraway lands and sending your goods off to faraway lands in order to survive, in order for a civilization to thrive. And most of all the great civilizations have been built near rivers. And some of them are named specifically in this poem. Now, notice this. I've seen rivers. I've seen the dawn of time. I've seen the pyramids being built up, all this stuff. One narrator can't possibly be that old. There's only one being in the world that's old, and he's not even in the world. He's up in heaven or whatever. So, the narrator here is a collective narrator, and this is very rare in poetry, but it does happen from time to time. The narrator of Negro Speaks of Rivers is not one man, but rather an entire race of people based out of Africa with much darker skin than just about anywhere else in the world. So, think of this collective narrator, and think of the soul of this narrator and how much deeper it's grown, how much this soul has suffered, and how much this soul has seen. This collective soul has actually seen everything imaginable, because civilization, or the cradle of civilization, is believed to be in Africa. And then all civilizations spread out from there. So, I've known rivers ancient as the world and older than the flow of human blood and human veins. In other words, these rivers were around before humankind was. These rivers were around before human beings were. So, that is the kinds of rivers that our narrator has known. Old rivers, like the Nile, like the Congo, like the Mississippi. Rivers that have been around much longer than people. My soul has grown deep like rivers. If you had lived about 40,000 years, your soul would probably be very deep too. But think about how deep rivers are. You couldn't navigate boats up and down the Mississippi if it wasn't deep enough. You couldn't navigate boats up and down the Nile if it wasn't big enough, deep enough. So, the depths of these rivers, also the depths of the human soul, are contained within those rivers. All right. I bathed in the Euphrates when the dawns were young. In other words, the Tigris and the Euphrates are the two rivers that are supposedly where civilization got its birth. At least that's what most historians and anthropologists believe. So, that river, at the very dawn of mankind, the very beginning of mankind, our narrator was there, bathing in that pure, clean, deep Euphrates River. I built my hut near the Congo, and it lulled me to sleep. So the earliest civilizations weren't big cities with skyscrapers. They were thatch huts. And these men would build these huts, and the river would lull them to sleep. It would be kind of like background noise. That was soothing to a certain extent, and so these folks could fall asleep. I looked upon the Nile and raised the pyramids above it. So Egypt, of course, is where the pyramids are. Now, who do you think built the pyramids? The pharaohs get the credit for it, but no pharaoh ever laid a single brick on these pyramids. It was the people, and usually it could be slaves, or sometimes it was slaves, it was low-wage labor. So, the Negro race, and of course Negro, I use that term because Langston Hughes is using it. I'm not trying to be offensive. Sometimes you say Negro and people get all upset. But, since Langston Hughes was African American, 3/4 African American, and he used that term, I'll go ahead and use that term in this poem. So, that race actually built the pyramids for the pharaohs. And the Egyptian skins aren't all that light colored either, if you think about it. So, this entire race of slaves built the grandest monuments to pharaohs imaginable. And there are these huge pyramids that now, all these thousands of years later, still stand. So those pyramids are still a monument to that race of slaves that built them. I heard the singing of the Mississippi when Abe Lincoln went down to New Orleans, and I've seen its muddy bosom turn all golden in the sunset. There are two types of song we can think about here. One is the sound of the river as it flows. So there's kind of a songish quality to that. But the other, remember that a lot of slaves would sing during their work. It would be a way to set time to whatever they were doing. Also, it might be a way to ease the suffering of being chained up and enslaved in these fields. So there's the singing of the Mississippi. It could be the river itself, or it could be the singing of the slaves that worked alongside the river. Also remember that the Mississippi River was a key waterway in the slave trade. So slaves, in fact, if you ever saw the movie 12 Years a Slave, that man that was kidnapped up in New York ended up on a plantation in Louisiana near the Mississippi. In fact, there's a scene from that movie in a New Orleans slave market where he had to stand there with his shirt off while people, touched him and fondled him and whatever to see if he was strong enough to work in the fields. So there's that aspect of the Mississippi as well, that slave trade aspect. I've known rivers, ancient dusky rivers. My soul has grown deep like rivers. So as you can imagine, if your soul were 40,000 years old, it would be deep as the deepest rivers in the world as well. Maybe even as deep as oceans, but that's not the title, the subject of that poem. So that's The Negro Speaks of Rivers. The final one, which is on page 633, is The Weary Blues. Before you actually listen to what I have to say about that, I'd like for you to watch that video, if you haven't watched it yet, or watch it a second time, of Langston Hughes actually narrating this particular poem while a band plays behind him. So that is the Langston Hughes on CBUT. So go ahead and pause this video, watch that again, and then come back. All right, welcome back. I was talking about the Weary Blues. First of all, it's likely that this club that the narrator's standing outside is the Cotton Club. The Cotton Club was a club in Harlem around 154th and Lenox, and it was unusual in that almost all of the entertainment was black performers. Louis Armstrong and Lena Horne and some of these others that are on that slide that you see. A lot of the entertainment was black artists, but they could only enter through the back door through the kitchen. They were not allowed to enter through the front door. The same people that were entertaining New York's rich and elite, and I mean the mayor was there, politicians were there, movie stars went there, celebrities of every ilk went there. As long as they were white, they were allowed through the front door. But the black celebrities were not allowed to sit there and eat dinner and drink cocktails or whatever. They were only allowed to sing on the stage or play the piano or things like that. So this poem takes place with a narrator who is outside of the club, which tells you what the skin color of the narrator must be, outside the club, but he can hear the piano and the singer of a very old blues musician who is weary. I mean, life has worn him down. He's exhausted. He's had enough. He's ready to give up. And he's singing these blues on the inside of the club. So on Lenox Avenue, which of course again is where the Cotton Club is, right there at that and 154th. He heard the guy. Take a look at the ebony hands on the ivory key. That is a very, very important image. These ebony hands, which ebony of course is like a deep dark black, on these bright white piano keys. And what are they doing together? They're creating beautiful music. So the black hands and the white keys creating beautiful music together. There's some kind of symbolism going on there with that type of image of race relations as well. All right, he heard that poor piano moan with melody, oh blues. Some people are good technical piano players, but if you can make that piano moan and make it sing, then you are considered a really, really talented artist. So this guy, of course, he's probably been playing piano all his life, and he's an old man now, so he should be good at it. All right. Played that sad, raggy tune like a musical foos, sweet blues, coming from the black man's soul, oh blues. Blues music, of course, is rooted in pain. It's rooted in suffering. And this man is singing it beautifully. Then we get the lyrics to the song. So he heard him sing that old piano moan. And, of course, I'll let you think back to what you heard on the video. I'm not going to sing for you. But then you got the thump, thump, thump of the foot on the floor. So it's likely that our pianist here has no backup band. So he has to work as his own metronome by using that foot on the floor. Or if you're in Dr. Odria's music appreciation class, working as a feet on the floor, able to keep time. So he's using his foot to keep time as he plays his piano. So our guy outside can hear the thumping as well as the singing itself. All right. And, of course, the end of that song, I Ain't Happy No More, I Wish I Had Died. So this is basically the sign of a man who has just given up. He's had enough. He's over it. Why keep fighting? He's been fighting his entire life, and nothing has ever come from it. All right. So, of course, at the end of the poem, when the stars go out and the moon goes out, of course, it's sunrise. So our pianist has been performing all night long into the dawn. Then he goes home. While these weary blues echo through his head, he slept like a rock or a man that's dead. You can interpret that one of two ways. He either slept very deeply because he was so worn out, or you can interpret it as he literally just gave up and died. Either one of those are legitimate interpretations, and neither one of them is really wrong, but they're both interpretations that you might find. So that's my video on Langston Hughes. I hope that this video helps you to understand this. It's better, of course, to discuss this in class where we can have some give and take, but since we are a hybrid class, I've gone ahead and made this video for you. Again, read through the biography, look through that slideshow about the Harlem Renaissance, and of course watch as Langston Hughes reads this poem out loud while a band plays in the background. And on that note, make sure you take the quiz, and you can use the poems, you can use the slideshow, you can use the video also while you take the quiz. And have a great week or a great weekend, and we'll see you on Monday.